Hello and welcome back to Parley. This prompt was written by EyePatchNotes. Hope you'll enjoy listening. I'm Zandy, I'll be your host. This prompt is about their Witch of Contradiction build for Pathfinder, and this is kind of the mechanical climax of that build, the Vital Contradiction, a very bizarre application of a very bizarre feat in Pathfinder that kind of makes the character click together. So this is a parlay that relies on a lot of previous EyePatchNotes Witch of Contradiction or Pathfinder related parlay to fully understand, in that we're paying off a lot of those things set up, but it is also a look into one person's very interesting application of a very bizarre build piece. So you may enjoy sticking around to spectate, but there will be a lot of context we're referencing from previous parlay that I will not be able to spend time explaining because it would take longer than the entire parlay. So here we go. If you're along for the ride for that, it's a very specific parlay. EyePatchNotes says, here we are, the mechanical climax of the Witch of Contradiction. A plot started so long ago. And I do mean plot, as I have been intentionally sugarcoating Mathfinder's systems for a reveal like this one. There have been times where a simplification of a system to explain it to me, to the audience following along who doesn't know about Pathfinder, is now going to be pulled back. No simple explanation, here's how it actually works. To attempt a summary, this parlay is about how Pathfinder does actually sometimes combine disparate feat trees into one. Full attacks, that is, spending your full round action to do it more than one attack, are inherently penalized, attacks become increasingly inaccurate as you do more of them. Two-weapon fighting, like dual wielding, enhances full attacks by adding more attacks and more penalties. There's a feat called Vital Strike that services characters who cannot full attack, well, in theory, and an even more bizarre feat called Dual Strike, which has both two-weapon fighting and Vital Strike as prerequisites, but doesn't really provide the benefits of either of them. Pathfinder's full attack dynamic means that an accuracy level of 30 or 40 after the die roll almost always hits its target. Armor class then transitions from a perfect defense at lower levels when you don't have as much accuracy to overcome it, to only defending against further follow-up attacks at higher levels. Most characters will not reach 30 or 40 AC without significant expense, so all builds should pessimistically expect one hit per enemy per turn. This leads to an explosive game of rocket tag, where the first character to initiate and land a full attack sets the tone of the fight. And there are some ways you can beef that up, feats we're going to talk about today. This parlay has a central idea that is, I think, a bit long and better left uninterrupted, so I'm just going to read the whole thing and then I'll weigh in about a bunch of stuff. As we reach the crescendo of the Witch of Contradiction saga, let us briefly indulge some past sentiments. I previously compared Hades to Pathfinder, in that boons are cumulative and time-sensitive. Clever players will maybe want to take options that are part of a multi-prerequisite chain early, lest they fail to fit the chain in at all. For Hades, this is particularly true when lining up multiple duo boons. This parlay's punchline is something I've been waiting to deliver for a long time. Despite me claiming otherwise, Pathfinder has duo boons too. Interesting. So some boons that require disparate feat trees built up, and then a boon in each one to then pay off and connect with a feat that requires both advanced feat trees. We're going to rip off so many Mathfinder band-aids, one will wonder what lives underneath. And the answer is more fucking math. In contrast to 5th edition, two-weapon fighting allows the character in Pathfinder to purchase additional attacks at martial score 0, 6, and 11. This mirrors extra attacks being systemically granted, not tied to any class, when you have a martial score of 6, 11, and 16. So the idea here is that when your martial score gets to 6, 11, and 16, through whatever method, your class gives you enough martial score by leveling up, you get extra attacks. So classes have different martial score multipliers. The idea would be that, let's say you're a fighter, martial score 1, I would assume. At level 6, you get, an extra attack. At level 11, you get an extra attack. But some classes progress their martial score slower. So like a caster might have 0.5, therefore at level 12, they'll get an extra attack. At level 24, they would get another extra attack. You could multi-class to get more if you wanted. And two-weapon fighting is giving you additional attacks, the option to get additional attacks with your offhand, I think, at similar martial score breakpoints. However, All attacks after the character's first are penalized, sometimes even the first attack. We'll get to it in a minute. Full attacks, frequently called iterative attacks or iteratives, have a ramping -5, I would assume, to accuracy penalty. It could be said that extra attacks are gained at martial score +6, +11, and +16 because they resolve with +1 martial score left over. Looking at any given character with martial score +11, they'll have +11 accuracy. Oh, the martial score is the accuracy as well. That's elegant. +11 accuracy for the initial attack. Then second attack, their first iterative. Remember, they're getting -5. So they'll have +6 for their first iterative, and only +1 for their second iterative. To hammer it in, full attacks are only possible if the character hasn't moved significantly, so a character that invests in full attack performance may find themselves without something to do if they're required to move around. Put a pin in it. Two-weapon fighting, the feat, is inherently dexterity aligned. It requires dexterity level 15, or score 15. As part of a full attack, a character can make additional offhand attacks. Making these two-weapon fighting attacks applies a -2 penalty to the whole full attack. Okay, interesting. Note that the system expects broadly that you'll have smaller weapons in your offhand. Two-weapon fighting with larger weapons is either impossible or heavily penalized. An optimistic 9th level rogue could expect, for example, a -2 penalty for their initial attack, -2 for their first offhand attack, then next, their first iterative set, -7, the -5 for an iterative, for their first iterative, and then -7 for their second offhand attack. I see, so you get a -2 anytime one of your attacks as part of a full attack includes the offhand attack. Interesting. So you end up getting a sort of a -7 for each iterative if you've woven in an offhand attack. And it seems like you get the -2 initially as well. So it's a little bit worse than that. Interesting. The 9th level rogue has a martial score of +6, so they get -2 for two-weapon fighting and -5 during iteratives. Okay. Characters still add bonuses from their stats, for example, strength, equipment, and battlefield conditions like flanking. You may find yourself asking, gee, it sounds like armor class would not be able to keep up with +20 flat accuracy before dice, which is exactly correct. Welcome to Mathfinder. Many problems stem from this dynamic, including the second half of this parlay, which I'm going to transition into now. Pathfinder's action economy frames multiple attacks and movement as mutually exclusive. Exceptions and rule benders exist, but the default assumption is either that you get your little 5-foot step and a full attack, or if you significantly move, you only get to attack once. Some characters may not even have a full attack, since their martial score needs to be at least +6 to even have more than one attack to use. All of these single attacks are made at the character's whole martial score. Diametrically opposed to the two-weapon fighting feat line is the Vital Strike family of feats. Where two-weapon fighting can be considered dead investment if the character is forced to move, Vital Strikes shine only and exactly when full attacks are not possible. For the aceified text, so somewhat simplified, Vital Strike is a combat feat that requires martial level 6, martial score 6. As a standard, not full action, the character can make a single attack and roll their weapon base damage twice. The additional base damage can't crit, and of course ignores damage bonuses, including from strength. For example, a character may declare a Vital Strike with a 1d8 longsword and roll 2d8 instead. All on-hit effects, such as sneak attack and weapon enhancements, are not rolled twice. It just doubles the weapon's base die damage. Long story short, all damage modifiers are calculated as for one attack, except the weapon's base damage, which is calculated for 2. If the weapon is a 2d6 greatsword, which is just about the best normal case you could have, Vital Strike represents at most 2d6 more damage. Vital Striking with a 1d4 dagger, the character must really not have something else they want to do with their martial score +6 feat slot. Yeah, man, I don't even play Pathfinder, and I feel like I can already think of several things that I would want more than that. So yeah, already, I have a lot to say about Vital Strike, but we'll get to it later. Now we can really start tinkering, though. Two-weapon fighting and Vital Strike could not be more at odds. Stronger when you do a multi-attack versus stronger when you can't do a multi-attack. Yet the Witch of Contradiction build is going to take both. Consider the following feat. Dual Strike, a combat feat with many prerequisites: two-weapon fighting, double slice, Vital Strike, improved Vital Strike, and martial score +11. As a standard action, the character may attack twice. These attacks are subject to two-weapon fighting penalties, usually -2 for each attack. Dual strike requires 5 feats total, any 2 of them actively conflicting with the others, and martial score 11 on top of that. A character might be able to cheat out 1d8 plus damage modifiers with each hand, but if the player needed to move, improved Vital Strike rolls base damage 3 times instead of twice. And if the player did not need to move, they could have full attacked instead. So what is the point of this feat? It would take a certain kind of player to burn 5 feat slots on 3 different kinds of attacks, unless there happened to be a character concept that somehow used 2-weapon fighting and Vital Strike at the same time. Recall that we went through great pains to build a medium familiar with a greatsword-like 2d6 bite attack, grant combat feats to the familiar via the Eldritch Guardian subclass, cheat 2 swift action bites every turn, connive a character that leaves their standard action free for shenanigans, and yes, the unique scenario of duplicating the Eldritch Guardian's feats means that the rider, the witch, can use the 2-weapon fighting half of Dual Strike, and the mount, the bat, can use the Vital Strike half. 2 great tastes together at last. For my explanation of what's happened, because the bat mount is sharing the combat feats from the witch, part of the cost of getting the dual strike feat, which is that you have to get a lot of feats that are inherently bad if you would want to be using dual strike, or like you have to get the 2-weapon fighting stuff, which makes the Vital Strike feats kind of bad. We've done this interesting way of paying that back off by having it be that the bat can use some of the feats that are prerequisites for this feat, even though the person using this feat almost certainly will not use those prerequisites. This feat is very expensive for a modest benefit, but some of that expense has been undercut by the fact that someone else can use some of the feats that are prerequisites. Very clever, incredibly niche way to maybe make this feat a little bit more interesting. Now, getting back to it a little bit earlier, EyePatchNotes has this topic about dead investment. And I think that's the first thing that stuck out to me about this. Like, even with this explanation, you've given an example in the system of how this could be useful, but I'm really more impressed with you, EyePatchNotes, and I just have a lot of questions for Pathfinder as a whole. Like, why does this exist? And Vital Strike as well, right? It's definitely something I can relate to in a lot of games where there are these elements where, yeah, game designer, I know that players will want Vital Strike or think they want Vital Strike. There will be character concepts where you want to stick and move and, not full attack all the time. And so you want some way to cash that in. You want to give players a feat they can pick that makes them better at that thing. Sure, I like that. That makes sense to develop in your game design. But but it just seems not very good, I guess, is where I'm going with this. There is this kind of fork a lot of the time when you get into a build system pretty deep. We'll get into getting deep into the system later, but where the context of a lot of feats changes. On a very surface level, you can say, oh, I see why this is here. It's here because basic understanding of game design reason. Players will want a feat that is good if they don't full attack all the time, so of course there's one. But then when you get deeper into the system, I don't know about Pathfinder specifically, but let's just paint an example. You might be in a situation where it's like, oh, well, once you understand the context, the opportunity cost of all these options, it's quite easy to have a standard action free, let's just say. I don't know if that's true in Pathfinder, but let's just say. And so, yeah, you can see on the surface why a player would think they wanted this, but on a level below, it's actually not very good most of the time. It certainly seems to me like it isn't. Dual Strike as well. That just seems like paying way too much for what it is, you know what I mean? Having not played Pathfinder, I just feel like you get 5 feats. Like think of the things we could do, the places we could go with those 5 feats. So certainly here we have an example of a build that is doing something interesting with that feat, but systemically, what the hell? Why? Why would you have this? Again, on a certain level, you can understand why things like this might exist, and the idea of combining the Vital Strike and 2-weapon fighting lines, kind of at odds, into a sort of duo boon thing is sort of interesting. But I felt disappointed as a player when I read Dual Strike. Prerequisites are longer than the benefit. I'm going to read you again, just reading out every word. The prerequisites and then the benefit for Dual Strike. Prerequisites: Two weapon fighting feat, double slice feat, vital strike feat, improved vital strike feat, martial score plus 11. As a standard type D action, the character may attack twice. These attacks are subject to two weapon fighting penalties, usually -2 for each attack. If you blinked and missed it, you might have missed the benefit of dual strike. In fact, I'm not entirely sure I understand what the benefit of this feat is, even after having read this whole parlay multiple times and being this deep into it. Can you not already attack twice as a standard action because you have two weapon fighting? No, I think the answer is that you need to full attack to get those two weapon fighting benefits, I think. You get one swing as a standard attack if that's what you were to normally do. This feat allows you to attack with two weapons or attack twice in a row, even when you only have a standard action to burn. And again, you might say, well, two weapon fighting lets me do... Oh no, two weapon fighting doesn't quite let me do that. Wait, but doesn't Vital Strike let me? Well, no, Vital Strike doesn't quite let me hit them twice. But it's so close. They're both so close to letting you do that. Reading this feat quickly and thinking about these things cursorily, it's like the impact of this numerically is extremely low without shenanigans. You know, it's not much. Again, in this case, we've largely validated the benefit of taking this feat because some of the prerequisite feats are beneficial anyway for a different part of the build, for the bat. But anyway, EyePatchNotes continues on this topic. Dead feats. A topic I'm very sensitive toward is dead investment. Unless calibrated just so, prerequisites can feel like ticking a box rather than contributing to a whole narrative. Take the quickly mentioned double slice feat. Requires Dex 15, two weapon fighting. You add your strength bonus to damage rolls made with your offhand weapon. Again, this is one of the prerequisites for dual strike. Normally, you only add half of your strength modifier to damage rolls when you make a weapon attack with your offhand. A character who has a strength modifier of +4 is gaining +2 damage on half of the attacks they make, only as part of a full attack. If they're not making full attacks, double slice does nothing. And even if they are, if we combine this with the two weapon fighting chain requiring up to dexterity 19, there are few character concepts that unironically want both high strength and high dexterity. Put another way, a character might have two stats in the high teens or 20s at the cost of others. Sandbagging a Constitution, for example, is not recommended as a melee character, so the character will likely have no mental defenses or contributions. No mental defenses being wisdom, and contributions to the party's utility or social checks, intelligence, and charisma. The idea here being, it goes even deeper than just, do you really want to get this minor benefit by getting these major benefits for two different types of attacking? Well, it goes further than that. To even have these feats do anything, you need to have a character concept that throws most of its other effectiveness in the garbage for what is... If it was a modest benefit, but you didn't have to make like a weird stat spread, that would be one thing. But to even get these modest benefits, you need to have a very bizarre mix of stats. So, and related, there's this element of the idea that you're splitting your strength up between different attacks. I'm not going to get into this one too much because I think it's summarized enough by that last point. But this idea that when you're making an attack with a two-handed weapon versus dual wielding, the two-handed weapon gets a 50% more strength modifier bonus. You have 3 strength, then it rounds up or down. I don't know. I shouldn't have picked 3. If you have +4 strength and you're using a two-handed weapon, you get +6 strength. If you're dual wielding, you would normally have your main hand weapon get your full strength bonus. And then if you have a double slice, which we just talked about, then your offhand weapon will get 50% of your strength. You've now made a two-handed weapon out of dual wielding. Okay, but it does cost a feat. It costs multiple feats? It costs multiple feats. As EyePatchNotes puts it, you could use only one hand, a main hand weapon, and miss out, but miss out on what? A character with a strength modifier of +4 gets a mere +2 damage when using their other hand. And again, I believe it's also partly with feats. Like that's only if you enable getting that +2. That theoretical +2 damage is often overshadowed by the weapon dealing damage measured in d6s or d8s. A 2d6 greatsword may not notice 2 more damage. One more Mathfinderism is that sneak attacks are not capped to once per turn, though. A two-weapon fighting rogue is going to be popping, however many d6s damage per qualifying hit. So that leads to very high damage per round on paper if the conditions are just right. Again, a question and I'm sure some of you have, is wait, in this system, why do you even care about attacking multiple times? Isn't it the damage? If you can get the same damage out of one big hit with a two-handed weapon, don't you just like want to do that rather than paying feats to do the same damage, but by hitting twice? And of course, there could be various benefits. Certainly from 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, if you attack a spellcaster who's concentrating on something, each individual time you do damage to them, they have to roll a concentration save. Now they roll a higher DC concentration save. It's a harder save to keep concentration on the spell if you hit them for more damage, but only above a certain point. So if you're going to hit them for low-ish damage anyway, hitting them more times can be more effective. If you play 5th edition, Upcast Magic Missile is basically the version of this. But you can, of course, do something different or bigger, like cast Fireball, a big single hit of damage. And it's the same here. I would imagine that hitting with your single big hit of damage may sometimes have advantages over a few small hits, and it may other times not. It may be better to hit lots of times. Certainly you can imagine if you're going to make them roll 4 big concentration saves versus 8 concentration saves. Even if the extra 4 from your offhand weapon are small, that adds up. Eventually people are going to fail. It's rolling a die, and again, the Upcast Magic Missile. But it's also interesting to consider that you might have a magic item that's a weapon with an on-hit property. You might be able to get damage just by connecting with the target. In 5th edition, a common tactic is for rogues to dual wield, not because they can get sneak attack damage with every hit, but because they only get sneak attack damage if they get one hit. The offhand weapon's actual damage doesn't matter at all. It's just the chance to roll an attack roll and hopefully hit. Just touching them for any amount of damage gives them their big burst of sneak attack value. And so having 2 attacks to go for that with instead of 1 is a very, very large advantage most of the time. Thus, rogues benefit from dual wielding, even though the second weapon hitting doesn't really do that much damage. Of course, if it did give them sneak attack damage bonus, that would also be a reason to want to attack twice, because you could hit twice and get sneak attack damage twice. Or, full attack and be getting sneak attack damage, I don't know, 6 times, right? Like whatever insane combo of 2-weapon fighting full attack you can pull off. It sounds like very high damage per round on paper, if the conditions are just right. I'm sure a build for another time. But the point is that the system definitely provides some ways, some reasons why it's valuable to hit multiple times. There's a lot of builds actually in 5th edition where you have a lot of little damage triggers that add up, but they happen once per turn or twice per turn or something. And so just hitting the enemy with great accuracy once is very valuable. Or Eldritch Blast is a pretty common solution. In 5th edition, cantrips will increase their damage every few levels, but Eldritch Blast is special. When it increases its damage, it gets it as a second full shot of Eldritch Blast, not more damage if that hits. It rolls a second entire ray of damage that does the same damage. On average, it's the same, of course, but the benefit is that, well, 1, you will hit for partial damage more often, because you're rolling multiple attacks to hit that each do part of your damage. So you can sort of partly fail or partly succeed, more often. The second thing is that, of course, if you get a benefit for hitting the enemy multiple times, well, you might get it multiple times. You might hit multiple times. This is, what's the name of that thing? There's a feat that gives you a benefit if you get to add your charisma modifier to the damage of your Eldritch Blast, Agonizing Blast, I think it's called. Whenever you hit. So as you increase the number of Eldritch Blast rays you get, the damage from Agonizing Blast goes up and up and up. If you're getting 5 flat damage from every hit, obviously very good. But then, of course, the knock-on benefit is that if you need to hit the enemy just once, this is, 2 or 3 or 4 attacks with chances to trigger all that damage, making it very, very consistent. You can basically guarantee that you're getting the 1d6 cold damage from your genie patron or whatever every single round. I've played builds like this a lot, actually. These were some of the first builds I ever played in 5th edition. and it's very effective either way to have the multiple attacks. So certainly those are some reasons. Again, this is where we can come down harder on double slice. Yeah, but those benefits really don't involve the damage of those other hits. That's really not nowhere in here have we mentioned that benefit. Now, of course, if you're making a lot of attacks, it adds up. If you're going to do a multi-attack where you get 4 extra offhand attacks, yeah, adding your half your strength modifier to that whole chain, I mean, you get 2 times your strength modifier and extra damage if everything hits. But again, in Pathfinder, we're losing accuracy every time you attack. And so probably toward the end, they won't hit, meaning really you're expecting like 1 or 2 of those offhand attacks to hit, meaning you're getting like half or 1 times your strength modifier, which is just not very good. So it's puzzling, isn't it? The idea that there are these things in the game that I feel like I'm talking a lot about the negatives of all these feats existing generally and not the coolness of finding a way to use them. But the point is, really, not that they're really bad or it's puzzling or that this isn't really cool, because it is a very good application of these, but more that the reason this works is because the benefit of these feats is narrow. And this is a situation where you have 2 narrow situations at once. Again, when the witch attacks, you can have them be using the 2-weapon fighting half, and have the bat be using the vital strike half. The witch has been built to be in a situation during combat where they are in the narrow circumstances required for one of the feats to be good. They're not bad as much as just not good very often, and the witch has been built to be in that situation, making it quite narrow and causing it to be unlikely that you'll meet the benefits for any of the other feats. Vital Strike too, it may not be good except in a very narrow situation, and because you put yourself in the narrow situation required for something like, let's say, 2-weapon fighting to be good, it's almost guaranteed that you will not be able to put yourself in the situation for Vital Strike to be good consistently. However, by having the mount that is also in a really narrow situation, you're able to have both of these feats work at once. But it's worth acknowledging just how unlikely that would be for other character concepts. You practically have to hand tailor a build to meet the requirements for dual strikes, child parent feats, I guess, feats, to be good at the same time. It's strange. I don't know. EyePatchNotes says more about Vital Strike. Diving into Vital Strike specifically, it can be summed up in one word: hollow. Even if we connive a character with 4d6 sneak attack damage and a flaming 1d6 is fire damage greatsword, Vital Strike only gives you 2d6 more damage. Not even strength gets added twice. Vital Strike is primarily offered as a mobile damage dealing option when full attacks are not possible due to distance. However, as soon as full attacks are possible, a -5 accuracy penalty is the only road bump to truly doubling the character's damage output. The final nail in the coffin vaguely came up previously. One of Pathfinder's most common defensive techs is to negate one incoming hit as a reaction. Consider also illusion-like spells such as Mirror Image that can negate large single hits turn after turn. Vital Strike has no specific bypasses for these defenses, whereas full attack could more consistently whittle them down. Ooh, that makes it even worse, yeah. There are elements like, even the way Mirror Image works in D&D, you would like to attack a lot of times and blow through those mirror images. Vital Strike concentrating some of the benefit into multiple hits, into one attack, is really, really bad against defenses against getting hit. That's just not advantageous. Not only is it, you have to be a character that would have a good martial score, but isn't going to use, what's the martial score requirement for Vital Strike? Yep, martial score +6. You have to have a high enough martial score that you'd have multiple attacks if you full attacked, but you didn't set yourself up to use them. You're on the move, and so you're trying to get back some of the benefit of getting multiple attacks when you can't do them normally by doing a full attack. But the problem is, it's like the worst half of multiple attacks. You get the damage, but you remember that whole conversation we were just having about how a lot of the benefit of attacking a lot is you roll to attack multiple times? That's the thing Vital Strike doesn't do. That's not good. That's bad. I'm sort of, it's kind of amazing how the benefits of Vital Strike are. But yeah, I mean, of course, applying it in a certain way helps. What I want to get into for sort of the end of this parlay is the idea of thinking through these things systematically to find their strengths, which is what will be required if you're going to make a build as convoluted as the one that EyePatchNotes has presented to us, that has managed to use all these disparate, very niche and granular benefits to attacking. Just as a quick aside before we continue, keep in mind that feats, if you're familiar with D&D, feats in Pathfinder are cheaper. It's not that bad to get a minor benefit from a feat. Of course, I don't know what the other feats in Pathfinder are yet, and so it seems like a pretty modest benefit to me, sure. But it's worth considering that you certainly get more feats. Some people from D&D might be thinking, good lord, 5 feats. You can't even get 5 feats as most character concepts in D&D, but you can in Pathfinder. You're generally getting one every other level, if I understand correctly, and potentially more if you play a more martial class. So it's very possible. You don't get infinite of them. 5 feats is still expensive, but you're getting perhaps a handful, 10. And so it's doable to spend, 5 of those on this combo, but there needs to be a decent benefit. It's still 5 feats, goodness. So as opposed to D&D where there are plenty of good character concepts that hardly get any feats. And that's sort of fine because the benefits of feats are also a little shaky. They're really good when they fit well, but they can be a bit hard to find something that fits. Whereas these, you'll note, they're pretty broad benefits. They would benefit a reasonable range of character concepts, but they just don't benefit them that much a lot of the time. Or it's questionable whether this is really worth it. But does it apply? Can you use it on this character concept? Yeah, it's widely enough applicable. Which, just to say, I feel like that's kind of better. If you're playing D&D and looking at this parlay and going, man, I really need to homebrew some more feats or put these in or whatever. Yeah, what I would aim for is to make some more broad feats. There are some that are way too broad. The lucky feat in D&D, if you're familiar. But I feel like that's the problem with a lot of those feats. They're either way too general, they're amazing literally 100% of the time for all conceivable characters, or they're so specific that to make a character that benefits from this, you may struggle to even have feats. Because you'll probably need a multi-class, for example, which reduces the number of feats you get most of the time in D&D. Anyway, I think the interesting thing to look at here is the sort of cognitive steps required or process required. Something that's been really interesting me lately is the contents of coming up with a build. What is this activity? What do you do when you want to have fun with these systems? When I'm looking at these feats, yeah, I don't think a lot of this sounds like the best way to design it, but I'm thinking it sounds fun. Why? And EyePatchNotes apparently had a lot of fun making. I think you had a lot of fun writing and making this. I'm having a lot of fun reading it personally. But why? How? And I think there's a couple of different elements. The first one is that while there is this dissonance, EyePatchNotes says, unless calibrated just so, prerequisites can feel like ticking a box rather than contributing to a whole narrative. But I dare assume it's so satisfying if you can make it not be like that. If you get weird prerequisites, but then you find a way that they're good, ooh, how satisfying it can be. And personally, I find that if something gives open-ended prerequisites, Hades boons do this a lot, it's really satisfying to be able to pick from among them which one is good value for your build. They also offer something I talk about a lot as a build concept is they offer a hook to put another aspect of the build on. Just as a simple example, in Hades, a lot of the time you'll have something like, a revenge lightning strike from Zeus triggers extra damage. But to get that boon, you need a prerequisite boon that does a lightning strike. And you might need another prerequisite boon that you can only get once you have a lightning strike triggering boon that does something to your lightning strikes, makes them able to strike twice, makes them, do more damage or whatever. But generally, there will be 2 or 3, like a little handful of options for prerequisites. You don't have to take just one too often, or I think they at least tried their best to make that the case. And usually boon chains, that is prerequisites, don't take more than 2 steps. So there might be a basic boon, a boon that requires one prerequisite, and a boon that requires a prerequisite that is a prerequisite like that, but it won't go further than that. And even boons that require 2 steps like that are kind of rare. There's not that many of those. A lot of duo boons, legendary boons, boons you don't even expect to get all the time. And so there is this element of planning it out, of looking at that, and as you said at the very beginning of the parlay, thinking about this idea of where you're going to take those options. You need to fit them in early, lest you fail to have time to fit in the whole set of them at all. And that can be fun in and of itself. Not playing as you go, but having a kind of guide sheet for, well, I want to hit these checkpoints, at these specific times. Certainly a difference with Hades, as an example you've used, is that you don't specifically know when you'll get them. In Hades, you're getting random boons, so although you can go for a boon from Zeus if you want those prerequisites, you can't guarantee that you're going to get the prerequisite that you want. You're just giving yourself more chances. And so you can roughly map out, well, realistically, maybe I get on average 1 or 2 Zeus boons in this biome or that biome, and I see how I do. Maybe if I'm a little behind, I'll take the Zeus keepsake just to make sure I get a few more. And then if I'm gonna need 2 prerequisites, then yeah, I'm gonna have to get 1 or 2 of those each floor for a few floors, or it's not gonna be active in time. But exactly when is not entirely clear. Whereas in a game like Pathfinder, making a build like this, you'll have it in mind, written out probably, that when you ding level 5 or whatever, you need to take this prerequisite if you want the combo online by, level 9 or whatever. And that can be fun in its own way. It can be stressful at times. There are definitely times I've played games where, because I will break the whole build I've been accumulating if I don't do things in such an order, it's not very relaxing to play while setting it up for me. Maybe I'm just an anxious person at this point in my life right now, but it can be difficult to relax a little bit, knowing that if I click through things a bit too quickly or just go with the flow a little bit, I'm going to miss a prerequisite for that entire playthrough, and there's no way to get it back. Your game master will hopefully be nice and just let you respec. But anyway, I have other examples we won't get into now. So that's an element, certainly, but I think that's also where the fun comes from. It's fun to kind of lay all those things out. I've recently been doing this with the Thought Cabinet in Disco Elysium. These are too long to explain now, but you have a very limited number of slots. It's reminiscent of feats, I guess, but you have to do certain dialogue options to unlock the thought. For your character to have it occur to them to internalize this concept, you have to do certain things, and some of them are just like do enough dialogue options like this or that. I would imagine there are feats like this in Pathfinder too. I think we've talked about some, where it's like you just need 3 other martial feats, feats that are tagged as a martial feat, and then you can get this other feat. So it might be say enough doomsday things, say the end is coming enough times in dialogue, and you'll get the apocalypse cop thought that will occur to you. And that's simple enough. There's enough of them in the game that you're not really going to miss it. You'd have to go past it enough times, and they're easy to recognize. The character will dramatically say this or that in dialogue, and you'll kind of know that, okay, this is the one. It's not hard to spot them. Or there's a lot of things like that. There's one that's like, say communist things to unlock thinking about communism, literally thinking about communism. I just look for the communist things. Communism is based, so you could just click on those anyway. Anyway, and you get put in a situation where it's pretty easy to keep up like that. But not so with a lot of plans like this, or with some of the other thoughts, where, yeah, you need to specifically react to this or that, specifically have this moment in the story happen, find this object and react to it in this way. Or again, the parallel to this case is have this chain of feats get underway, before the campaign ends, hopefully by level 9, I think is what we were targeting for these builds. So 5 feats, yeah, I think that's all of them by the time you get to level 9, depending on what else you take. You're taking more levels in Fighter, aren't you? Is that what it's called in Pathfinder? Yes. So no, you probably have more than that, but anyway, and we need more than that because you need the one that lets you share your combat feats to your familiar, right? Anyway, And so you can see this build requires quite a lot of prerequisites. It's the kind of thing where, I don't mean to put words in EyePatchNotes' mouth, but when I've made builds of similar complexity, it's on the level where you've made enough cognitive steps that you might even forget exactly how the build's mechanism of action works momentarily, before you pull up your inevitable note document that you basically have to use a build like this and look into it. Again, don't let me put words in your mouth, EyePatchNotes. I don't know your life. Maybe you knew all this off the top of your head, but this is pretty well documented. Like, politely, I would assume that you probably did have this written down previously. I would imagine many players who do this kind of thing also do. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But I think that is part of the fun. It's kind of satisfying in one way, which is that you are doing something that requires quite careful sequencing to do. A lot of players won't get to this point. It's a version of that appeal of having a unique build. It sounds like hipsterism on one hand, but on the other hand, it is a more reasonable form where you don't delude yourself into thinking no one else has done this. It's just that you literally can't do this by the game's own rules. The sequence of actions you have to take requires that you plan at this early fork, almost like a choose your own adventure game being done in a different way than usual, which can be kind of fun. You're sort of off-road or on the rough terrain of that part of the game, which can be a really interesting feeling if you've played the game more normally. We'll get to it in a second. Less cognitive steps. And another element of it being pleasant is that it can be weirdly relaxing. While you do have to make sure you get certain parts of the build at certain points, you have written for yourself, prior to this play session, a literal guide for how to set up the build. So it's this element of like when you have a loadout of builds in a game, you've already done the build making part now, and you can enjoy playing the game, which to you is quite heavy on build systems, without engaging with them at all, sometimes because you have those builds ready, ahead of time. And especially in a tabletop role-playing game where you're probably making one build at a time, I feel like that can be really relaxing. You know what you're going to make and you get to focus on that completely. This is not Warframe where you have a overblown wardrobe of 50 builds that you totally can't manage. It can maybe be more relaxing this way. So that's very interesting. Another element for me, so that was the idea of, why is it maybe appealing to plan the builds this way? I think that's fascinating. But another thing is the sort of cognitive steps element, going through these feats and thinking about them as, okay, this is the level one is, why does this exist? Who is this meant to be good for? And then a level below, you might think, well, is it good though? Like, is the general power budget of this feat good? Maybe no in some of these feats cases. But then below that, okay, but who cares what it was for? And who cares whether it's good generally? What would it take for it to be good? And can we create that situation? And thinking that way doesn't sound that special if you do it a lot, but I think that this is the big difference for a lot of people. They kind of don't immediately think, there's an impulse to assume that it's good or bad and that's what it is, rather than saying, well, everything is good in the right situation. Everything is bad if it's not in a good situation. Just what would it take for this to be good? And for our extremely janky niche feat dual strike from before, I think it's a reasonable assumption to evaluate it and say, well, what it would take for this to be good is partly to lower the opportunity cost a bit. It requires so many feats that you probably won't use while getting this feat, that for it to feel like a good option compared to what else you could get, you would have to find a situation where you were somehow using one of the other feats, even though you literally can't use them at the same time most of the time. Just having it be that you invest in, as you put it, asymptomatic 3 different kinds of attacks is not very likely to make it feel worth it to a lot of players. You're probably going to have to find a way that you somehow needed to take those for something else. The prerequisites are double prerequisites or something. Or again, in this case, the bat is using some of the other methods to attack. And that method of going the level below to say, why ever this was here, let's see what it can do. Is sort of the core spirit of making a build, but also I think part of the fun. You dig around and see if you can find a way in the system to make that work. And certainly for my part, when games have enough options that you feel like you often can make things work, but not so many that it feels like literally anything will work if I just get like crunch through everything, is usually when I like it the most. When there are non-obvious tools available, but there are enough tools available to sort of do the thing. There's enough open-endedness in the system. Enough, a really, really big point is how you can give feats to a familiar or like another animal companion we talked about in previous Parley. That system allows a lot of open-endedness to maybe find a prerequisite being useful somewhere else. If it's useful ever, you can possibly create that context as well on one character sheet. Or, you know, I could imagine you could somehow even do it with a buddy. I don't know if that's a thing, but that sort of cognitive stepping, I think, is one of the more interesting aspects of making builds this way, where you put the player in a position where they're meant to think below and see just what is it, unjudgmentally, willing to take whatever it's going to be. This is why I'm always a little prickly when players bring up like how good things are too much or before talking about the thing. You know, I don't mean to psychoanalyze EyePatchNotes' Parley here, but you can see in a lot of these descriptions, you always put what it does before a little evaluation that is often a bit of a quip. Like it's just sort of, we're having a bit of fun with the weirdness of the feat. You always put that after, like, what does it do? And then, yeah, like generally this is a bit janky, sure. But even after taking down Vital Strike in brutal fashion in one of these little sections on the side that we had, we're still using it in the build. It's still theoretically very useful. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting. You can really see you wrote a lot, EyePatchNotes, so it's really easy for that to come out anyway. But you can really see the mindset of someone who would find a combination of stuff like this. It's just very, very satisfying to read for me. I feel bad, like if this Parley could be text on the screen, I feel like that would be fun. But you can always go back to the Discord channel and read these Parley if you want to. This was an interesting one to read. Anyway, wrapping up this Parley before the Action Economy Epilogue Parley. Okay, that's the next one. That sounds fun. Here's a recap of the Witch of Contradictions. Crimes against common sense. Hinder, that's the thing alongside hexes or cackling from the Witch class, prevents the target from making multiple attacks. So you're in melee range, but you won't get ripped in half by their own multi-attack. Dual Strike allows multiple attacks from the Witch, even if the character moves, multiple chances to get that hit and trigger the extension on Cackle, or there's a Witch Hex thing related to that, if I recall. Eldritch Guardian turns Dual Strike's bad feats into rad feats. Boo, but acceptable. That is what it is. Eldritch Guardian giving the feats to the bat as well means that some of the prerequisites for Dual Strike aren't as costly as they would be because you actually use them. And just one witch level, then the rest is fighter. Again, I presume part of the reason for this is that you just need the feats. Like this requires quite a lot of feats already, and therefore having fighter, which I think it's more, but they have to be combat feats, means that you have enough feats to do the thing. I think I'm remembering. Am I remembering all of this good? Anyway, between the witch's punch punch bite and the bat's bite vital strike, kind of 2 bites, a single player can lock down a target without giving up that much damage output. The bat itself fits in 8d6 at full accuracy. Yeah, like the damage output is substantial for making an enemy basically unable to move and not even able to attack as much as they would otherwise be able to. Definitely in terms of power level, though again, you remember my comment from before, you'll note that this is being put at the end of the Parley. Not the reason it's interesting primarily, I would argue, but yeah, like it is also good. We're just putting it at the end. Like, it is a fairly impressive amount of attacks alongside I don't know how much damage those witch punches are doing, but again, I guess I won't judge. Maybe the strength is quite exceptional. It has to be, actually, doesn't it? Well, the 2-weapon fighting feat line requires dexterity. So yeah, depending on how it scales, I would assume the damage is pretty okay. Sure, fair enough. Anyway, I thought this one was fun. This was a fun one to read. We didn't get a graphic for this one, and I thought that was interesting for this particular Parley because we have a lot to chew on in terms of you've presented it very well. I thought this one was written quite effectively. So I think the graphics are very nice, EyePatchNotes, but I just wanted to say that I thought this was a pretty effective parlay even without them, and that's hard to do. It's a lot easier to talk about these things with a visual aid. I hope I presented it sort of followably. Again, this one, I hope you don't mind that I made the executive decision to not try to summarize everything about the build in this parlay. I feel like that just isn't going to work for most audience members, and the people following along and you obviously know it, so I would rather it be for those people, but I think this could be pretty fun if you were spectating the series as well. So anyway, looking forward to the next one, the action economy epilogue. I can sort of imagine what we're going to do in that one, so we'll see if I end up being right. Folks, if you'd like your own parlay like this one, you can get one using a link in the description. Love to have you with us. For now, I'll say looking forward to the next one, EyePatchNotes. Thank you very much. See you next time.